G'day, I'm Marcus, and I've been working customs at Sydney International for 8 years now. Thought I'd seen everything until last month, when an American couple arrived during our biosecurity inspection. The bloke had packed his hiking boots still caked in actual dirt from his last trip to New Zealand. When I explained we'd need to confiscate them for soil contamination, he looked at me like I'd personally insulted his ancestors. Confiscate. These are $400 Red Wings? This is that communist Australia thing I read about. Mate tried to argue that because New Zealand and Australia are basically the same country, the soil transfer was domestic. His wife was furiously Googling whether Australia was still part of the British Empire, because the Queen would never allow boot confiscation. They demanded I call the American Agricultural Embassy to verify that. American hiking boots have international soil immunity. Spent 40 minutes explaining that our biosecurity laws exist because we're an island continent with unique ecosystems. He kept insisting it was a scam to sell tourists new boots at inflated prices, and that he'd seen this trick in Mexico. Finally paid the cleaning fee while muttering about authoritarian footwear policies. His boots had literal sheep dung in the treads. And this is exactly the level of firsthand chaos I break down every week. Most channels give you tourist cliches. I give you frontline reality. If you value that difference, lock yourself in now, so this kind of story doesn't vanish from your feed watched. A bloke at Melbourne Airport baggage claim, try to tip the carousel. Not a person, the actual rotating luggage belt. He'd placed a $20 note on top of it, watching it go round and round, genuinely confused why no one was taking it. When I asked what he was doing, he explained that in America, the baggage guys really hustle and deserve tips. Mate, that's a machine. He'd already lost 3 bills to the carousel before someone stopped him. American woman at Brisbane Biosecurity declared her emotional support sandwich from Lax, 7-hour-old turkey club. Wrapped in airport napkins, now room temperature, and definitely questioning its life choices. Insisted it was medical equipment because her therapist said she needs familiar foods during travel stress. Argued that because her doctor knew about the sandwich, it had prescription status. We don't have emotional support sandwiches in Australia, love. The sandwich was disposed of with the dignity it deserved. Right? Let's get into the chaos. First day back after my vacation. I'm stationed at the arrival's biosecurity declaration when this American family comes through. Mum, dad to teenage kids. Dad's wearing a shirt that says Australia, where everything wants to kill you with cartoon deadly animals. Standard tourist gear. But then I noticed their declaration form lists snake bite kits, spider anti-venom, crocodile repellent spray, an emergency kangaroo deterrent, canned emergency kangaroo deterrent. These people have packed like they're entering a war zone. The mom pulls out this massive first aid kit, we're talking the size of a suitcase, and starts explaining their Australian survival protocols. She's got laminated cards with pictures of our dangerous animals and her planned response to each. Huntsman spider protocol involves a flamethrower motion. Dad interrupts to explain they've studied the statistics and know that Australia has 21 of the world's 25 most venomous snakes. He's created this whole theory that Australian tourism websites deliberately downplay the danger, because if Americans knew the truth, nobody would visit. Starts telling me about his mate in Tennessee who knew a guy whose cousin got bit by a Sydney funnel web and died instantly. I gently explained that yes, we have dangerous wildlife, but most Aussies go their whole lives without serious encounters. We're not dodging snakes on our morning commute. Dad looks genuinely confused, asks if I'm paid by Tourism Australia to say that. Mum shows me her phone. She's got an app that supposedly tracks real-time deadly animal locations across Australia. It's clearly a fake app showing dangerous creatures everywhere. She's paid $47 for this thing. By the way, this is the kind of misunderstanding most people never hear about because it doesn't make the travel brochures. I track these patterns full-time so you don't have to. If you want the insider version of Australia, the one tourists never get, join the people who are already tapped in. Their teenage daughter admits she's been terrified for months. Had nightmares about drop bears, which her parents believe are real, and have packed helmets for. I spend 20 minutes explaining that drop bears are a joke, Aussies tell tourists. Dad refuses to believe me, insists there's a government cover-up because of tourism dollars. Finally let them through. Watch them walk into the Sydney sunshine wearing tucked-in socks, long sleeves, and 32-degree heat, and constantly scanning the ceiling for aerial threats. Mate, the most dangerous thing you'll encounter is probably sunburn. Next situation was this American businessman. Absolutely fuming at Adelaide Airport because there's no express lane for international executives. In America, apparently he's got TSA pre-check clear. Global entry, the whole alphabet of Q-skipping. Arrives in Adelaide, expecting similar treatment. Loses his mind when he's directed to the regular customs line with everyone else. Starts explaining to my colleague Janet that he's a Platinum Elite Executive Diamond member of his airline. Janet's nodding politely, trying to explain we don't have separate lanes based on airline status. This sets him off on this elaborate theory about socialist Q equality being bad for business efficiency. He's not just annoyed, he's created an entire economic argument for why important people should skip queues. Pulls out his phone, shows us his airline app with all his status badges like they're military medals, demands to speak to whoever's in charge of VIP processing. Janet explains that our customs process is the same for everyone. High court judges wait in the same line as tourists. This absolutely breaks his brain. He cannot comprehend a system where money and status don't buy preferential government treatment. Starts trying to negotiate. Offers to make a donation to the customs department. Mate, that's called a bribe. He's genuinely confused about why we won't take his money. Begins explaining American efficiency, how premium customers drive economic growth, why fast-tracking wealthy people benefits everyone through trickle-down immigration processing. It's the most bizarre application of economic theory I've ever heard at customs. Finally gets through the line, took him 15 minutes, same as everyone else. Spent the entire time on his phone, furiously texting someone about Australian bureaucratic inefficiency. Later, found out he'd written to the American consulate suggesting they negotiate express lane provisions for American executives in future trade agreements. He thought this was a diplomatic issue. Then there's this American couple at Perth Airport, absolutely baffled by our quarantine detector dogs. We've got these beautiful beagles that sniff arriving passengers for food items. They're brilliant at it. This couple sees the dog, immediately assumes it's a police dog searching for drugs. Wife starts panicking, telling husband to act natural, even though they've got nothing illegal. Dog sits next to their bag, standard indication it's detected biosecurity items. They interpret this as the dog alerting to drugs, and the husband starts this whole defensive speech about how they're law-abiding citizens and don't even smoke marijuana. My colleague Trevor tries to explain the dogs actually detected food. This somehow makes it worse. They've packed 3 blocks of Wisconsin cheese, some beef jerky, an apple, and seeds from their garden because the wife wanted to grow American tomatoes in Australia. Classic biosecurity violations. But instead of just admitting it, the husband creates this conspiracy theory that Australia invented the food dog excuse to search Americans without cause. He's convinced the dog is trained for drugs, but we're pretending it's food to avoid needing warrants. Starts citing American Fourth Amendment protections, which don't apply in Australia. Wife's Googling Australian police state tactics right there in the customs hall. Trevor's trying to explain our biosecurity laws. We're an island nation protecting unique agriculture from foreign pests and diseases. Husband's not having it. He's decided this is about controlling Americans' freedom to bring food. Creates this whole narrative about Australia forcing tourists to buy expensive local food as a revenue. Scheme genuinely suggests we're in partnership with Australian grocery chains. The absurdity peaks when he demands legal representation for my cheese. Mate, your cheese doesn't get a lawyer. Had to confiscate all their prohibited items, which they treated like we were seizing family heirlooms. Left muttering about filing complaints with the UN Food Rights Council, which doesn't exist. I'm processing a family from Texas at Cairns Airport. They've flown in specifically to see the Great Barrier Reef. Great choice, beautiful part of Australia. Dad's at my counter, getting increasingly agitated because everything's so far away. He's looking at a map, complaining that Sydney's over 2,000 kilometers from Cairns. In his mind, Australia's about the size of Texas, so major cities should be a few hours' drive apart. I explain Australia is roughly the same size as the continental United States. This information physically staggers him. His wife jumps in with their theory. Australian maps are scaled wrong to make the country look bigger for national pride reasons. They've somehow convinced themselves that Australia is exaggerating its size. Dad starts explaining how they'd planned a weekend road trip hitting Sydney, Melbourne, Cairns, Perth, and Uluru. Mate, that's like driving from New York to LA to Seattle to Miami in a weekend. I pull up actual driving times. Cairns to Sydney is 28 hours of straight driving. His response: that's impossible. It's all on the same coast. He's looking at the map, genuinely confused about basic geography. Creates this elaborate theory that Australian distance signs are in different kilometers than the rest of the world. Suggests maybe they're nautical kilometers, or some special measurement. His teenage son, who's been quiet until now, quietly Googles it and confirms Australia is massive. Dad dismisses this as internet propaganda, insists they're still doing their road trip, just driving faster than the signs suggest. I try explaining road conditions. Fuel stops, the vast stretches of nothing in the outback. He's convinced I'm exaggerating to sell them domestic flights. Finally, the mom asks if they can just drive around the coast to see everything in 3 days. I tell her the coast is over 25,000 kilometers. She looks at her husband and says, maybe the map's right. They ended up canceling half their plans. Absolutely shocked that Australia isn't a cozy little island you can lap in an afternoon. Heard them later arguing about why school never taught us Australia was big. Different day, American bloke at Darwin Airport, furious that it's hot. Not just warm, he's genuinely angry about tropical heat. It's November. He's packed for Australian winter because it's winter in America, so it must be winter everywhere. This is the southern hemisphere, mate. Seasons are flipped. He's wearing a puffy jacket, thermal underwear, the works, sweating profusely, blaming Australia for false advertising. Pulls out his phone, shows me a weather app that's somehow set to Sydney's winter temperatures from 6 months ago. He's convinced this is current weather and Darwin's heat is abnormal. Starts creating this climate conspiracy maybe. Australia's experiencing localized global warming, or Darwin's having a heat wave emergency. Explain it's just normal November weather for tropical Australia. He cannot accept this. Demands to know why the tourism website didn't warn Americans about the heat. Made it says tropical climate right there. He's decided Australia's tourism industry deliberately confuses Americans about seasons to sell them inappropriate clothing. Gets really specific with his theories. Australian retailers are in partnership with Northern Hemisphere clothing brands to force tourists to buy new wardrobes upon arrival. It's elaborate, I'll give him that. His actual complaint: if it's November, it should be cold. That's how months work. The concept of seasons reversing in different hemispheres is breaking his brain. He's trying to logic through it, suggesting maybe Australia should rename the months to avoid confusion. Proposes Australia call November something else, so Americans know it's actually warm. I tell him we've been using these month names for a couple hundred years, probably not changing them now. He leaves to buy shorts and a t-shirt, muttering about upside-down calendars.
Later.
See him at the baggage claim, jacket tied around his waist, posting on social media about how Australia doesn't follow normal weather patterns. Then there's this situation at Hobart Airport with an American woman who's absolutely convinced Tasmania is a theme park. Not metaphorically, she literally thinks the entire island is a constructed tourist attraction. She's asking me where the Tasmania experience ends and when they drop the act.
Appled.
Turns out she's seen Looney Tunes cartoons featuring the Tasmanian devil and assumed Tasmania was invented for Warner Brothers, when she discovered it was a real place. She concluded it must be like Disneyland but for Australia. She's looking for the real city beyond the Australian cosplay area. I try explaining Tasmania is a legitimate Australian state, home to over 500,000 people who genuinely live here. She's not buying it. points out that Tasmania has deliberately old-looking buildings and too much nature to be real. In her mind, it's all constructed. She's impressed by the attention to detail and wants to know how many actors are employed to play Tasmanians. Mate, we're not actors. We're just Tasmanians. She asks if the convict history is part of the story or if it's real. When I confirm Tasmanian convict history is actual history, she nods knowingly, says great backstory. Very immersive. This woman cannot be convinced Tasmania isn't performance art. She's complimenting the commitment to the bit, treating my entire state like an elaborate role play. Starts asking technical questions about how they maintain the illusion. Whether the wildlife is trained or animatronic, her husband's embarrassed, trying to explain that Tasmania is real. She's having none of it, insists he's just falling for the marketing. As she leaves customs, she winks at me and says, "You're great at staying in character." I'm not in character. I'm just Tasmanian. Later heard she'd posted a review online praising Tasmania, Australia's most dedicated theme park experience, with 5 stars for never breaking the illusion. Final story before I clock off. Last week, absolutely peak confusion at Sydney Airport. American blokes connecting through Sydney to Auckland. But he's convinced Sydney Airport is trying to scam him by not having US customs. He's looking for American customs officers in Australia because he's flying to New Zealand, which is near America. This man genuinely believes New Zealand is somewhere off the coast of California. When my colleague Emma explains New Zealand is actually near Australia, just across the Tasman Sea, he accuses her of lying for the airline, pulls out his phone, starts Googling, discovers New Zealand is in the South Pacific. This revelation sends him into a spiral. He's recalculating his entire understanding of Pacific geography. Gets angry because if New Zealand isn't near America, why do they speak English? Emma tries explaining British colonization, Southern Hemisphere geography, but he's stuck on the language thing. Develops this whole theory that English-speaking countries cluster together, and New Zealand should be near England or America, not Australia. He's not just confused, he's offended by the geography. Like someone's deliberately arranged the continents wrong to inconvenience him. Starts suggesting the flight's too short to reach another country. Maybe it's actually going to Australia and New Zealand, which he thinks might be a territory. Emma pulls up a map, shows him the distance. He studies it, then asks why Australia and New Zealand don't just combine into one country to make things easier. 8. We're separate nations with our own governments, cultures, and fierce sporting rivalries. He's not convinced separate countries this close together make logistical sense. Proposes we merge for efficiency. Eventually makes his flight. But not before asking if he needs to exchange his Australian dollars for New Zealand dollars or American dollars. Emma tells him New Zealand has its own currency. Another currency? For one little island. This is getting ridiculous. He boards, still muttering about unnecessary complications. Got a call later from Auckland Airport. A same bloke tried to use Australian dollars everywhere. Couldn't understand why New Zealand wouldn't accept them. Apparently asked multiple people why New Zealand doesn't just use Australian money since they're so close. Some geographical concepts remain beyond reach. Look, working Australian customs means encountering every possible version of American expectations, meeting Australian reality. Most visitors are wonderful. But there's always that handful who arrive with such specific assumptions about how Australia should work that reality becomes personally offensive to them.